Okay. Hello, everybody. Hi, so I think we'll just start. I hope you can hear me. You cannot? Working? All right. So thank you. All right, now it works. Welcome to this panel. So we'll discuss LTSs, LTLEDs, and more precisely, how can they be best elaborated, and above all, how can they lead to actual financing strategies and implementation. So thank you for the NDC Partnership Pavilion for hosting this side event. I'll start by introducing myself. I know it's impolite, but very, very briefly. So my name is Hervé Breton. I'm in charge of the deployment of a specific facility that is dedicated to actually elaborating and supporting the elaboration of LTSs and related studies and efforts in countries. That's at the French Development Agency. What I'd like to do before I introduce our panel is maybe start with a few words about LTSs in general, very, very quickly, and very few words, and it's the last time I will speak about that, about the facility we have in AFD, because it illustrates a few things. I'll start with that facility. So it's called a 2050 facility at the French Development Agency. It was established back in 2017, so just after the Paris Agreement was signed, along a overall strategy with AFD that basically commits that all our financing will be consistent with low carbon and resilient pathways of countries. So, and that was obviously to respond to what we see as a basic and fundamental expectation vis-à-vis development finance, in particular of the Paris Agreement, that is consistency with those long-term, low-carbon and resilient pathways of countries. So in order to adhere to that commitment, we thought it was absolutely necessary to basically invest in knowledge products about plausible pathways in countries, but also cooperation instruments to help countries elaborate those long-term strategies. So that's what we have. So, and I'll stop there with this description concerning AFD. So the discussion we propose to have here today will basically stem from the experience that we've gathered at AFD, but also from the experience of actors that have been involved in supporting those strategies and elaborating them. So basically countries, think tanks, initiatives. So we've here physically two representatives of those basically actors, and I try to introduce them briefly, but if you want to add to what I say, please feel free. So we have here Ms. Marcela Jaramillo, who is the Executive Director of the 2050 Pathway Platform initiative that was set up just after the Paris Agreement, I think 2016 already, in order to support the elaboration of long-term strategies. And the platform has been a major source of methodology of support to start with, methodology and coordination on these exercises. We have Mr. Adrian Fernandez Rimans, who's the CEO of Iniciativa Climática de Mexico. ICMA is a prominent think tank helping shaping public policies in Mexico. Online, we have Steve Nichols, who is the head of mitigation at the Presidential Climate Commission in South Africa. I hope, Steve, you can hear us.
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Excellent. Good afternoon, or good morning, rather, I should say, for you. And thank you for joining online on a Saturday. So the idea, just to get a bit more into the substance, was basically to hear about practices and lessons learned from those actors, in terms of course, how to elaborate best LTSs, but also basically, more precisely, now that we have a bit of experience, what comes next and how to implement it. So how LTSs transform into policies, both short-term, long-term, how they actually lead to investment plan, how financing strategies can be drawn up from those LTSs. And when I talk about financing strategies, we mean not only the strategies to finance investment plans, we mean strategies to finance the overall changes that are implied by the long-term visions, and they affect basically all sorts of economic agents. So with that, I will invite now Marcela to share a bit of her experience from the multiple interventions of the platform on this. Marcela, wherever you'd like. Yeah, we will need the presentation. Yeah.
Hi everyone, super happy to be here, and thank you Hervé for the invitation. So you already heard about that, the 2050 Pathways platform, and I'm going to share with you a little bit of what we have been seeing and learning from our work with countries on what it takes to move from actually making the strategies that can inform implementation, right? And part of that is how do we inform financing. And of course, there are a lot of lessons learned on that and a lot of instruments that we have been developing to advance on that area. And this is coming really from an experience of advising or supporting directly over 60 countries on their LTLETs everywhere across the world. So I hope this is going to be helpful for you. So just to start there, we, as I mentioned, the idea of developing the long-term strategy is really to identify how can the transition take place in a country. What will it mean in terms not only of the GHG path, but also what will it mean in terms of the actual physical transformation, and what will that mean in terms of development objectives. And the idea at the end of the day is that they are sufficiently clear or helpful into then informing specific measures, actions, policy, investments now. But there have been many challenges. This has been quite a learning curve for many countries across the world, and we have seen many bottlenecks in this area. So this is a summary of some of the bottlenecks we have identified, and we kind of working together with the whole ecosystem to find solutions for this. So the first one is, and this is coming from the LTLET synthesis report that the UNFCCC prepares every year, but they basically identified that over 60% of the long-term strategies were flagging in the strategies that were having really finding bottlenecks and difficulties into articulating how the implementation of the strategy will bring safeguarding sound fiscal public finances, and also how to access new sources. So I think that's probably the heart of what we're going to be talking today, but that is quite a strong message there. The other big challenge that we have been seeing is that countries often found very difficult to translate long-term strategy goals into specific kind of investment roadmaps. And part of it is a lot about the ability to translate a lot of technical, high-level GHG emissions into actual physical implementations. And here we're basically talking about bus fleets, hectares of agriculture that need to be managed. Also adaptation measures, infrastructure. So how do we really move from translating a lot of GSG generally targets into these specific, which are also geospecific elements that can then inform real pipeline? There is something in there still missing. That much work is been doing, and a lot of work is been progressing on that direction, but we need to improve. Similarly, because the LTSs and, I mean, in general, climate action, we all know, it really touches in every aspect of economy, society. And so when we are looking at a long-term strategy and understanding what the transition means for the country, we are looking at multiple sectors, multiple actors, and we really need them to be involved because they know the sector better than anyone else. So the data for the transport sector, the goals for the transport sector, for the energy sector, the agriculture sector, for the social protection sector. There are many, and there are still difficulties to really bring them around, to really be part of the process, to own the process, and also planning and finance, which are often quite important, and many countries do have these economic actors that are really overseeing and planning the key elements of the economy and the key roles of the government. And then really also touching in several of the elements before, we still see a gap on methodologies and tools that can help countries really take the conversations, the results stemming up from the long-term strategy processes into public policy planning. What does it mean to integrate it into the existing tools, like investment public platforms, policy reforms, etc. And then finally, this goes in line as well. We're really able to, because we always talk about the strategies, being a very strong signal for the public and private sector, but is that really happening? What is that really being translated into? Still a lot of work to do there. There is progression, but still some of the areas of work that we need to do to realize what we are saying that we want to do. So to tackle some of these aspects, of course, are very global and very broad. In the platform, we started developing tools and working with countries in certain aspects that we think can help them make the strategies more robust and advance on those challenges that we were seeing in there. So the first aspect, we started really to work with many countries on developing the cost-benefit analysis along with the LTS. So you really need that information to be able to engage with policy decision makers about what the different pathways that we are researching and discussing my country could take, how those different pathways result in terms of costs and benefits. So we really can have a conversation that is broader than, information on tons of CO2. So we have partnered already with the IDB in a couple of these exercises. These exercises have been done in several countries in Latin America, actually. But we, together with IDB, supported the analysis for the case of the carbon neutrality in Peru. And then we also developed a whole study for Latin America and the Caribbean last year. And this one actually has available online the toolkit for the modeling and the open data. So countries that would like to use that information to apply it to their own country can do so. And overwhelmingly, everything that we found in these studies every time is that the benefits are far higher. So it's not only a burden, it's really bringing important benefits for the whole of the economy, whole of society. And just to give a little bit of a picture of what are these benefits we are talking about, here is a little bit of a graph that shows generally some of the benefits that we found in the case, for example, of Latin America, and this could vary in different areas of the world, but there are many benefits that can come, for example, from efficiencies in saving materials, in fossil fuel use. There is a lot of efficiencies coming from health. Actually, air pollution is one of the bigger killers in Latin America and the Caribbean, and this is a big solution for a huge problem in the region, and there are many others. But there are also costs, and the costs are the investments, and in the case of Latin America, of course, there is also this element of how do we make the use of land use, and so there is also some perceived cost in there. So this is just to give a view. Now, knowing that there is cost benefit and that is good moves the agenda alone into, okay, let's discuss this in detail. It doesn't mean that everyone will be ready to invest. This is just one piece of the puzzle, right? The other thing that is coming up precisely actually from these conversations when we start engaging on, okay, the cost benefit looks good, let's talk about this for real, then other questions start popping up. And these are now, we're seeing them more and more related to the socioeconomic aspects of the transition. What would this imply in terms of, for example, fiscal dynamics? A lot of countries have fiscal revenues that are based on taxes to transport, etc., that will be transformed. So understanding how those fiscal revenues will be affected will be important in terms of designing a green fiscal framework over time. But there are also issues like trade balances that are becoming more and more relevant, and countries are asking themselves, okay, what does this mean for me? Of course, labor markers are a big question as well. For example, in countries in Africa where there is a lot of youth, the big question is how do I generate employment for them at the same time that I do this transition? And there are also distributional impacts as well. How are we managing? How are the different areas of society being affected, and how do we ensure this is a just transition? So we only started work in this area. We're currently doing some analysis on the impacts on these different aspects in Jamaica, and also starting work in Chile. And we really want to join forces. We know there are many people in the ecosystem working on this, and we just want to see how we continue to provide answers in this area. Then there is another important area which I think we all talk a lot about, which is, okay, what is the role of the Ministry of Finance on this? How do we bring them into this? And then usually the one of the elements that comes along with that is this element of finance strategies. So we work quite closely advising the Finance Coalition, the Ministries of Finance Coalition for Climate Change in the guide that they published last year to really try to spell out a little bit in detail what could be the role of Ministry of Finance in long-term strategy planning, which comes along particularly about can they really articulate what are the questions or the issues they would like to understand through that process. That's one of the key elements. So understanding better what they need, what will be useful from this process is a way that we think can help us advance and improve the long-term strategies. And we also did, this year we published a study we did also with the IDB, with the Ministry of Finance platform for Latin America and the Caribbean, where they were asking, okay, everybody tells me I need to do these finance strategies, what are these things about? So we look at experiences in Latin America and also internationally to try to recommend ways forward. And we found interesting things. We see this is an instrument that has expanded quite quickly. There are over 50 countries around the world that have them, many that are on the way of planning. And however, we did find that some of the ones that are already in place were very useful in awareness raising, in setting some of governance instruments. However, there was not a lot of clarity that they were directly linked to the objectives of the NDC or the LTS. In many cases, they tried to do a lot of things, but there was no clear prioritization or allocation of responsibilities of who can actually carry out these things. So there is still a question of all the work that we have been doing, how effective it is on this area, what can we do differently? So I really invite you to, this is a document that is published in the IDB website, also in the 2050 Pathways website, and there are very practical recommendations on how do we improve this planning going forward. And it's an area that we also support in 2 countries. We supported Rwanda in actually developing a part of the investment plan for the LTS. And then finally, so I stopped talking, we also started thinking on one of the challenges that we saw, and is, okay, what are the practical tools that can really help in the case of Ministry of Finance to really get them engaged? Because in many cases, we talk with them and they're like, yeah, I love this, I want to be part of this, but what do you want me to do? I mean, this is what I usually do, this is what I know, I don't understand what you're asking me to do. So we started to develop what we call a LTS finance dashboard. We started developing it initially with I4C, which a think tank based in France. A lot of learning from the experience that France had on planning investments for the transition. And then we took it and applied it in Guatemala along with the development of the long-term strategy. And the dashboard changed a lot because you take it to the real ground and then a lot of things change, but it was a very enriching experience. This work gave the opportunity to the Ministry of Finance of Guatemala to find their role in the LTS development. They wanted to be part of that, but they didn't know what they could do. So they made part of all the sectoral discussions. And what we did is that we took all of the results from the sectoral analysis and we translate them in a finance dashboard in terms of relevant information for the Ministry of Finance. And we check with them, like, is this information you need? Is this information you need? And finally, the dashboard basically has information on the sectors in the LTS, what are all the measures included in each sector that need to be achieved, what are the costs and benefits of each of those measures over time. And then there is a whole exercise of trying to understand how much of those measures could be public, how do they link to the budget tagging or the taxonomy they have for investment planning in the country. We also did a whole analysis of the taxes in the country and which one could be related, impacted for good or for bad through different measures in the strategy. And this basically gives them already a tool in which they can speak in their terms, what does it mean to implement the strategy and how they can prioritize. And we're really excited about this. We're gonna be publishing the lessons learned from this and the dashboard, it's an Excel. And we're really looking forward to help other countries to maybe implement it along with the LTS strategy. I'll stop there, but thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Marcela, for essentially setting the scene in terms of and setting the framework for all those themes and questions that need to be addressed, but not only also giving a hint about actual tools, actual approaches to address them. So that's extremely valuable. Of course, we'll have a round of questions after all of our panelists have spoken. But I'd like now to invite precisely Adrian to share his experience on Mexico after we've set the scene basically through Marcela. So Adrian, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adrián Fernández. I am the CEO of the Mexican Climate Initiative, which is one of these regional regranters or regional climate foundations. The work I'm going to show with you, I'm going to present to you today, it was done with the generous support of European Climate Foundation, actually the Pathways 2050 project. And let me say a couple of words about the environment and the in which we develop this work. In Mexico, we just experienced a change of government a few weeks ago. We are very enthusiastic about the prospects of significant improvement in the climate policy and in other policies in Mexico. But I'm saying this because the previous administration basically neglected the environment, climate, and many more things. Therefore, we as a civil society organization, the Mexican Climate Initiative, we had to prepare a comprehensive NDC for Mexico from the civil society. That was not the official document, that was the only detailed document available in the country. That was 2 years ago. And last year, we did the same for the second most important commitment that countries have today with the international climate community, which is telling the world by when and how you expect to reach net zero emissions. So we did this work, which is an estimation of the net zero pathway for Mexico. On the basis of the bottom-up analysis, a very detailed analysis, we came to the conclusion that Mexico could reach, with the right policies and investments in place, we could reach net zero by 2060. So what I'm going to show you, and this has to do with the quote that Marcela showed us at the end, that says that having a good plan is not sufficient condition for success, but not having one is always a recipe for failure. So what I'm going to show you is hopefully what is a good plan to begin with. We also analyze some financial considerations, of course. Let me see if this works. Yes. Quick advertisement. As I said, the Mexican Climate Initiative, it's a foundation. It is also, sorry for the lack of modesty, the most important climate think tank in Mexico. That's why we do the sort of analysis that we did. Each of the two analyses I mentioned, the NDC and the 2050 net zero pathway, we're talking about a document, a policy document of about 60 pages, supported by 600 pages of detailed, transparent, and robust analysis, numbers, models, emission factors, and so on. It's not perfect, but if you do it robust and transparent, we can continue working together to improve it, and hopefully the new government is going to use it. So, as you know, it is so important for countries to develop the net zero pathways for a number of reasons. One of them is not just to pick and identify the right policies, also the right investments, also the right sequence in which you have to invest and go ahead implementing policies. And in the analysis we did, we identified what we believe is an ambitious but feasible pathway for Mexico, and that's how we reach the 2060 year as a possibility. Now, I'm not going to stop here. Just a little sample or a little bit on the what is behind this comprehensive analysis. We use a number of different models for different sectors to estimate emissions, trajectories, and so on, and to identify, first of all, starting with the national emissions inventory, to identify what's the feasible potential for mitigation in each of the sectors, identify specific mitigation measures for each sector, and then we need to think about, as part of the feasibility, that's where the money comes from. Is it, what are the options for financing something, and who is responsible for what? This is the typical building of trajectories with the expected behavior of each of the key sectors, so that as you move forward in time, you should be reducing emissions of each of the sectors, so that all together might take you to the net zero result, which is the bottom line, the bottom slope that you see there. Oh yeah, only one example I want to share with you so that we collectively reflect on 4 key aspects that I believe every net zero pathway or long-term strategy should take into consideration. Again, I chose the power sector because the key elements here talk about these 4 criteria. First, we need to tell the countries and the sectors and every stakeholder, we have to be clear and real about the scale we need. There's no more time for gradual progress and, oh, we have a little solar power plant here and maybe the first wind power, whatever. No, we need to be clear about the scale we need and the urgency to act. So no time to waste. We need large scale and move very quickly. But then we need also to identify what's the sequence, what goes first, what goes last. And equally important is to identify by when certain things must happen. For instance, by when we have to get rid of all the coal power plants, by when we have to get rid of the fuel oil power plants. We have a few in Mexico. By when we should not build additional new gas-fired plants. This is equally important. We don't want to have stranded assets. We don't want to continue investing in the wrong infrastructure. This is very valuable. It has significant opportunity cost. We just finished a new refinery. Imagine, I mean, what could be worse than nowadays to build a new refinery. So we're very ashamed about that. Not the government, the citizens. And so this is the kind of considerations that a government and policymakers must be witty. They think about thinking big, large scale, moving quickly, but having the right tools and analysis behind them. And this is my final slide. You can find all the information that we produced. I didn't include, we have a cost-benefit analysis, we have the marginal abatement cost curves for each sector so that you identify what's the potential in mitigation in tons, what's the cost per ton that you reduce of emissions, and so on, and also the sequence in which you have to do your investments. All the information that ICM produces is public, so all these hundreds and hundreds of pages, both for the NDC from civil society and the net zero pathway
pipeline. What are you going to invest in? When are you going to invest in it? And then the second is the enabling environment. Do you have the skills, the trade policies, the technology, the finance in order to implement it? Classic means of implementation in COP talk. And we have at the PCC, at least in South Africa, observed two phases to this kind of work. And the first is the sort of high-level socio-technical modeling that you need to answer the question, what are the net zero pathways? What are the timing of those pathways? And critically, how much is needed to be invested to make those pathways work? Sort of socio-culturally, the key thing that piece of work does is it shows that it's possible. So prior to doing that kind of work, a country just has no idea what to do, if it's possible or not. And people's biases tend to be, it's not possible to transition at that kind of pace and scale. So we kind of went through that process in sort of 2018, 2020, which resulted in the NDC that is currently submitted, that sets the ambition for the country. And that kind of first phase of socio-economic modeling is what sets the stage for it. Typically, from a modeling perspective, it identifies high-level key risks. So, for example, South Africa is very carbon intensive, and so our major trading partners have committed to net zero, which is changing what they're buying, and the things that we sell aren't really that suited to what they're buying. So, for example, our top exports are platinum group metals, which are a key component in the internal combustion engine and the autocatalytic converters. We export coal, we export iron and steel, we export aluminium, and so we have this very carbon intensive export profile that unless we can green is going to fade on us, which has balance of payments implications, which has cost of capital implications. And so you get in this potential cycle of you can't service your debt, you get credit rating downgraded, your cost of capital becomes more expensive, it's harder and harder to invest your way out of it. And typically this first phase uses kind of traditional macroeconomic CGE type models. That's the kind of granularity that you're working at. The second phase, though, is when you get into the implementation. How do I break up this big plan? And we have numerous different versions of that plan in South Africa. So there was work done by the business sector, there's work done by Treasury, there's work done by Environmental Affairs, there's work done by the electricity sector. They don't always overlap. So that's part of the challenge. So getting that kind of unity is a key part of the second phase. But also then starting to understand the feedback loops between identifying the project pipeline and the enabling environment. And there we tend to bring in the finance community too late. So we sort of say, this is the plan, finance community, how can you finance it? And really it should be a collaborative effort to say, what is the most effective way we can finance this? And therefore, what kind of plan should we be able to set? And I'm going to come back to that point in a moment. But the second phase is fundamentally a political economy question. It's not a sort of techno-economic question. And so you're answering a whole range of different types of questions. And in particular, in the South African context, we're thinking about the just transition. And so how are these transitions impacting people on the ground? How will we protect those people, particularly when you have such a fossil fuel intensive economy and locally in South Africa, regionally very concentrated? So the impacts of phasing out of coal is in one geographical area where unemployment is already 40% and youth unemployment is 60%. It's created a province called Mpumalanga. So really in the second phase, from a finance perspective, the key question that you're trying to ask is how do you allocate scarce risk-bearing capital in order to maximize leverage? And how do you allocate grant financing in order to strengthen the institutional capacity to absorb additional finance, what we call absorptive capacity here in South Africa, but also to be able to build sort of domestic and local institutions that can generate pipeline according to the national plans. So those are really the key things that you're thinking about. And when we're thinking about the allocation of scarce capital, it might be concessional debt, it might be grants, it might be some form of guarantees. You want to be able to maximize leverage. And so if we think about the JET IP, although a significant amount of money, 8.5 billion, currently a bit more than that, just over 11 billion, you need to be able to leverage that money. So if we look at the JET IP in particular, it predicts a need for about 100 billion US dollars. And so the 8.5 to 11 billion, let's call it 10% of what we need. And if we're able to leverage that to attract additional private sector and public finance, you're still going to fall short. And so I guess one of the challenges of the fit for purposeness of these kinds of funding sources is that they're not particularly leverageable, being predominantly policy loans state to state. I mean, they play a huge role in enabling Treasury to stimulate. So the kind of concession is passed on through the economy. And so there is leverage there, but it's not going to be leverage of 10 to 1. And so that is really how then there's this interaction between the enabling environment and the project environment. And so then the modeling approach that we take is quite different. So then we are trying to blend a whole range of different models that are a little bit more granular. So we have modeling efforts looking at how does changes impact household income levels in Mpumalanga, for example. What does that mean for the kind of social support that would be need to be leveraged in those areas? And the key enabling factor across all of this modeling is the question of economic diversification. So as you're phasing out fossil fuel-based and intensive sectors in the economy, what are you replacing them with? And so that then also expands a little bit on the traditional phase one pathways work, is to say, well, what else are we going to stimulate and incentivize within the economy to create employment and livelihood options? I'll make one last point or a series of points in relation to the financial modeling side, is how we deal with risk and uncertainty. So the high-level models tend to be quite generic. You need to build more renewable energy, but when you get down, or you need, maybe a better example would be peaking support for gas. How do you finance that gas in the local context? And in particular, when we start to think about scenarios, what is happening in the global context? And that causes quite a lot of socio-political ructions because, for example, if we look at International Energy Agency scenarios in the sort of business as usual step scenario, demand for fossil fuels only drops sort of 10 to 20% by 2050. In the stated commitment scenario, it drops by 50%, and in a net zero scenario, it drops by 10%. So what you believe is happening in the world is a huge input into how you think about financing that investment. So if, for example, we wanted to meet the peaking gas demand in our net zero electricity plan through exploiting domestic gas resources, you would need an international demand for that. And so if you believed you were in the STEPS world, you would need to only be more competitive than the worst 10 or 20% of people in the markets. If you were in the middle world, you'd have to be in the top half. And if you're in a net zero world, you would have to be amongst the best. And that then impacts how you think about risk and therefore the cost of capital and therefore the feasibility of those particular projects. If you then add kind of system shocks and stress testing to that, if we continue with the gas example, we would probably build our gas infrastructure on the East Coast of South Africa, or possibly also in collaboration with our neighbor Mozambique, and the climate models forecast that these are the areas that are going to be increasingly hit by Category 4 and 5 hurricanes. So what does that mean then for the risk that you model when you think about building that infrastructure? And so if that infrastructure was taken out by a hurricane, how would that impact the energy stability and security of the country as a whole, particularly because of this key role of peaking in the energy system? Then the final thing that we've started to look at and think about in this consideration of the relationship between finance and identifying specific models is the kind of type 2 error. What if you make the wrong decision? And again, using gas as an example, there's a very interesting case that we looked at. If we build the gas peaking support that we need, so some FSRU units in some of the ports and some pipeline, and we don't need it. In other words, the technologies for batteries move faster and the peaking support can be provided by other technologies. It would cost the country about 40 billion US. If we didn't build it and we needed it, that would cost the economy hundreds of billions. And so then that kind of suggests that on a risk basis, you would sort of try to build those projects. So that's kind of the types of things that we're starting to think about in this phase 2 of converting the LEDs into specific projects. And there is a complexity in that. There's some quick wins. There are things we have to do. So for example, upgrading the grid, and it's obvious that we would use some of our scarce concessional capital in getting that started. But the grid is something that has secure cash flows. And so you wouldn't expect to be deploying our risk-bearing scarce resources in the long term to do that, and you would have to shift quite quickly to thinking about private sector finance of the grid without privatizing the grid. And then at the other end of the extreme, you have things like social issues and adaptation issues that have no cash flows or traditional means of linking to the modern finance system. And so there you want to deploy more of your scarce resources. And so we're kind of mapping out the enabling framework and the potential policies or potential projects that would emerge from the research that has been done, and then matching them to these kinds of risk approaches in thinking about how you would finance particular programs. So I'll stop there, and hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you so much, Steve. I think basically one can say that you've been in such a short time illustrating the complexities of again, implementing actual LTSs in the sense of implementing investments. You've talked to various milestones in developing those investment plans, and also what I found particularly interesting that you also mentioned the relation to basically all sorts of environment, local but also global. So I'm just gonna cite a few things. The importance, of course, of macroeconomics, very upstream. The importance of political economy when it comes to actual implementations, financing projects. Very interestingly, the notion of the strategic use of financing of scarce resources. But not only, I thought it also extremely interesting that you mentioned the idea that, of course, it's a matter of sustainable financing. It's not a matter of, it's a matter of finding the project that have a cash flow inherent to them. And again, when they have, of course, and again, that dependency in all that thinking on basically the global environment. In terms, I think we have 4 minutes for questions to our panelists. If there are any questions, please raise your hands. I think I can sort of. I don't see any immediate questions, but I think we're almost done. The lesson I would learn is that basically what we've seen is that we're still at various stages. Actually, amazingly enough, after 9 years after the Paris Agreement of implementation, actually of LTSs. So there's still a few countries that are not yet facing the sort of implementation questions that we see are complex. But probably one of the main takeaways is they need to be anticipated, and so the more thinking and the coupling of sectoral modeling with macroeconomics and social issues, the better at the earliest stage possible. So I think what I need to do now is thank you all again, thank our panelists for those very interesting insights regarding their experience, and thank you to NDC Partnerships again for hosting us. Thank you, Steve, from where you are. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.